Hey everybody, I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want to give you, our viewers, a chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Hi, Professor Dershowitz.
Hi.
Great to have you again. All right, so let's get started. Professor, as you know, every week we open our show with a special guest. Today we have Doron AlMulk, an Israeli Prize winner and former Major General in the Israeli Defense Forces. AlMulk has a very touching personal story to share with us and a very special question to accompany it.
Professor Dershowitz, this is Major General Reserve Doron AlMulk from Alan Negev in south of Israel. I just want to remind you a very unique visit here in this village. I like telling you that we continue developing this place. The vision is about giving a home for severely disabled children, those who having a combination of autism and retardation, loving them, facilitate a love and caring society. In a way, it's utopian society. Here in El Negev, Muslims and Jews and Christians working beautifully together for one purpose, enveloping love to these disabled people and at the same time integrating them in our society. So thank you for your visit and thank you for your wonderful work for the State of Israel. I want to ask you one question in respect of my history. September 11, 2005, I landed in UK for a social mission for these disabled people. Unfortunately, 3 arrest warrants were issued against me, stamped by a British judge. Until now, I'm avoided arriving to UK, ironically. On one side, I'm a social activist working for severely disabled people, like our loved child Iran, who born with severe brain injury. From the other side, I'm limited by my movement all over the world by this arrest warrant. And I want to ask you about using the international law against those who are doing their work to defend their countries and working according to the law of their countries, and at the same time, terrorists may be using the international law in order to facilitate arrest warrant or lawsuit and use the international law as a new weapon to fight democracies like Israel. I would love to hear you answer. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, General AlMulk. You know, I would love to say you're doing God's work down in the Negev, but no, what you're doing is the work that God left uncompleted. You're dealing with severely challenged men and women who, without your work, would have even more difficult lives. I visited your facility, which is just fantastic. I could not believe what I saw and the devotion that you and your staff have to people who have been left out of the mainstream by so many others. You make them feel loved and wanted, and they are loved and wanted. And the idea that you who have done so much for humanity, you who have done so much to promote the rights of the disabled would be subject to an arrest warrant in England is just an abomination. And I want to make you an offer. I would love to accompany you to England at some point with a team of lawyers. And if they had the chutzpah to arrest you or to try to hold you in detention, we would challenge the law. We would challenge the approach. Now, the British government's on your side and on our side. They don't want to see this happen, but there is a bizarre British law that permits it to be done. There are efforts to try to undo that law. International law won't help you. International law has forbidden Great Britain from expelling imams who have made speeches inciting violence. International law today is more protective of the rights of terrorists than it is of the rights of good and decent people like you. And so we have to fight this primarily under domestic law. And we can do it. If you tell me when you're going, and I've made the same offer to General Shkedi and others who have also been subject to the threats of arrest for doing what every democracy has done, defending its civilians against terrorist attacks. Others have done the same thing, and we've put together teams of lawyers to try to help. So far, there hasn't been a challenge to the British, the Spanish. Some other countries have these absurd laws which allow individual hypocrites to file arrest warrants with individual magistrates who hand out these warrants as if they're presents at Hanukkah. And that has to stop. And you should have the right to travel anywhere you want in the world. Right now, your right to travel is more restricted than the rights of known terrorists to travel. When Leila Khalid, who hijacked El Al airplanes, wants to go to England, not only is she welcome there, she's treated as a goddess and a hero. And you, who are indeed a hero and have done so much, both when you were in the military and in your post-military life, on behalf of challenged and disabled people, are treated like a criminal. That is wrong. It has to stop, and I will help it stop. And if there's anything I can do to help you legally, constitutionally, and in any other way, politically, I am there to help you. I'm on your side. I am now your lawyer when it comes to these and other related issues, if you will accept me as such.
Well, that's a big offer, so we'll see if he takes it up. All right, Professor, now let's hear some questions from our viewers. Denny Benarroch hails from Madrid, Spain, but he's now studying and living here in Israel. He's concerned about the separation of synagogue and state in the Holy Land, and he wants your take on the issue.
Hello, Professor Dershowitz. My name is Daniel Benarroch, and I'm a Spanish Jew who has lived in the US and in Israel, currently living in Israel. And I have spent a lot of time throughout my life dedicated to Jewish activism. And as such, I would like to ask you a question that is pretty close to my heart and could be considered some kind of modern Jewish struggle. After Ben-Gurion's decision to hand in certain aspects of governance to the ultra-Orthodox community, such as religious marriage, for example, the preserved status quo has created a divide within the Jewish community. Given that almost a quarter of Israel's population is not Jewish and that another percentage is secular, how do you believe that Israel's laws should be changed in order to have a more inclusive society and at the same time create a balance between the Jewish and the democratic characters of the state? Thank you very much.
Daniel, that's a great question, and it goes to the heart of what Israel is. It is the nation state of the Jewish people. It's understandable, though I think tragic, that David Ben-Gurion made his deal with Harav Kook and allocated to the official Orthodox community so much power and authority over personal issues. And the effect has been tragic for Israel. The effect has been a great divide between secular Israeli Jews and religious Jews. By the way, the same thing applies in the Christian and Muslim communities. That is, the imams have control over marriage by Muslim Israelis, and there have been fewer complaints about that because there are many, but there are fewer secular Muslim Israeli citizens. Separation of church, state, mosque, synagogue is not only good for civil liberties, it's good for religion. Think about the United States. We have strict and complete separation between church and state. And that's why so many Americans are religious. And even those of us who are more secular have enormous respect for religion. I go to an Orthodox synagogue. Some of my mentors and closest allies are people like Rabbi Yitz Greenberg and Rabbi Avi Weiss. I have tremendous admiration for my high school classmate, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin. We don't have a war between the religious and the secular in the United States the way there is in Israel. And I think the fact that the Israeli rabbinate has so much power and has used it often so corruptly, tragically, has created tensions between the secular and the Orthodox. And also, it means the exclusion of conservative and Reform Jews from many aspects of Jewish life. Conservative and Reform Judaism are thriving in America. You know, I am a post-denominational Jew. On Rosh Hashanah night, my wife and I sat together at Central Synagogue, listening to a Korean woman Jew who is the rabbi of one of the largest synagogues in the United States, Central Synagogue. And on Rosh Hashanah morning, I went and heard Cantor Helfgott in Park East and Rabbi Schneier. So I consider myself somebody who loves all aspects of Judaism. I have very close friends, and I work closely with the Chabad movement. I'm the faculty advisor for Chabad at Harvard. That could happen in the United States because you have strict separation, and the religious authorities have no control over our lives. Nobody can tell me what to do on Saturday or on Sunday or on Friday. And it would be healthier for religion in Israel, much healthier for religion, if we had a strict separation and there was no such thing as an official rabbinate or state-sponsored rabbinical authority. Let rabbis bring Jews to Judaism through their word, through their wisdom. It was Theodor Herzl who said, let the rabbis remain in their temples. He was a big advocate of separation of church and state. And I think that separation has done wonders for America. America is the most religious country in the Western world because we have the strictest separation between church and state. And the more you have separation, the more religion thrives in a country. The more you have unfortunate integration of religion and government, the less popular religion becomes, and the greater the tensions between the religious and the secular.
Good point. Now, Professor, let's turn to a question all the way from Sydney, Australia. Sam hasn't yet immigrated to Israel, but he wants to know whether such a move is one that all Jews should aim to make. Let's hear his question.
Hi, my name's Sam from Sydney, Australia, and I'd like to ask you guys, with the current wave of Aliyah from countries such as France, do you think the ultimate goal should be that all Jews will end up in Israel, or do you think there's a strength in having a Jewish diaspora?
What a great question, Sam. Zionism is an option. It's not an obligation. I have thought often of whether I should have made my life in Israel, how different my life would have been had I been an Israeli rather than an American. My grandfather went to Israel in 1932, before I was born, to see whether he could make a life for himself in Israel. And he was unable to, and he came back to America. I often think of how different my life would have been if I had been born in 1938 in Israel rather than in Brooklyn, New York. I think every Jew should have at least one foot in Israel, should visit frequently, should think about Israel as an option, as a place to go. Israel is often going to be a sanctuary, always going to be a sanctuary for Jews who are being discriminated against, and we're seeing more and more of that. And we may see more of that now in Eastern Europe with the rise of nationalism and extremism. We're seeing some of it in France. And if the Labour Party in England ever came to power, we would see large need for immigration from Great Britain. But right now, Jewish communities are thriving in many parts of the world. And it's very important for Israel to have allies. Benjamin Netanyahu once told me that he thinks part of my job is to keep the American Jewish community strong, because the American Jewish community is a very important weapon, ally, support for Israel. And having thriving American Jewish communities in Australia, in Canada, in Great Britain, in France. Tragically, there used to be thriving Jewish communities all over North Africa. Those no longer exist because 700,000 Jews were pressured, forced, expelled, threatened into leaving lands that they had lived in for thousands of years, well before the creation of Islam, and yet they were forced to leave, and we had an exchange of population where 700 or so thousand Jews from Arab countries came to Israel, and approximately the same number of Arabs left Israel and moved, some of them under pressure, some of them on their own, to surrounding areas. Of course, the big difference is that Israel integrated its Jewish population from all over the world, didn't put them in camps, whereas the Arab countries put Palestinian refugees into horrible camps, using them as political pawns in the effort to delegitimate Israel. So I encourage you to make Aliyah to Israel. I encourage many people who want to come to Israel to make Aliyah, but I also encourage people who want to make their lives in thriving Jewish communities abroad to remain in Galut, to remain in exile, and to keep supporting Israel and to help strengthen Israel from wherever in the world you are.
Thanks, Professor. Now, staying focused on the Jewish issue, we have yet another question for you. Nina Paul hails from Cincinnati, Ohio, and she's concerned about the relationship between American Jewry, like you spoke about, and Israel. Let's hear what she has to say.
Hi, my name is Nina Paul. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, presently visiting Israel right now. Had the wonderful opportunity of meeting you in New York at the Jewish National Fund Conference and truly enjoy your books and your speaking. And I have a question. I want to know why so many American Jews and Israelis are so critical of Israel.
It's a great question. There really is a sickness abroad. If you get somebody like Gideon Levy, who writes for Haaretz, there is nobody in the world who writes so critically and unfairly and absurdly about his country as Gideon Levy. In most countries in the world, he'd be put in jail for treason. Thankfully, Israel is a vibrant democracy. But Gideon Levy falsifies history, falsifies morality. Amara Hess, so many writers for Haaretz cannot see anything good in Israel. They often invoke the oldest of anti-Semitic tropes. They say that everything Israel does good must be done for a bad motive. The people who advocate, for example, pink washing, they say, sure, Israel is good for gays and lesbians and transgenders, but they only are good for these people because they want to cover up how bad they are for the Palestinians. I mean, that's the oldest anti-Semitic trick, saying that anything that appears to be good done by a Jew must be bad. When you have a man like Levy saying that Jews shouldn't attend the memorial for Yitzhak Rabin because essentially he was a warmonger, it just is a sickness. And Israel responds in a healthy way by allowing people like that to continue to write for newspapers like Haaretz. And as you know, Haaretz is not widely read in Israel, but it's widely read around the world because it is the center of hypercriticism against Israel and against the nation state of the Jewish people. For many of Haaretz's editorial writers, Israel can do nothing right. And then you have the really, really sick Jews like Gilad Atzmon, who's a saxophonist in England, who essentially is a Holocaust denier and who wonders why people don't believe the claim that Jews murdered Christian children and drank their blood. This is a man who uses his very Israeli name to give himself credibility. And the argument is the argument by ethnic identity. Look, if an Israeli like Gilad Atzmon says all these terrible, terrible things comparing Israel to Nazi Germany, it must be true. Or Norman Finkelstein, who essentially says that the Nazis ought to be embarrassed by the comparison because Israel is in many ways worse than the Nazis. Or Noam Chomsky, who regards Israel as among the worst human rights offenders in the world. Sometimes it's ignorance, sometimes it's perverse hatred. But there is a lot of Jewish Israel bashing. Some of it is ideological, people from the hard left who simply buy into the hard left ideology. Some of it is psychological. It all has to be permitted in the name of freedom of speech, but it all has to be answered in the name of freedom of speech. Perhaps the worst offenders are the Neturei Karta, who claim to be Jews. I don't understand what makes them Jews, except that they have long beards and try to look like Jews, but they are so hateful toward Jews. Some of them are Holocaust deniers. Some of them blame the Holocaust on Jews. They despise everything Jewish and everything about the nation state of the Jewish people. But because they look Jewish, they are used by Jew haters around the world to give legitimacy and say, look, we can't be anti-Semites. The Jews are saying this. Well, Jews can be anti-Semites. The Turek Karta are anti-Semitic. And I'm embarrassed that one of their leaders has my last name and uses it sometimes to promote his hatred. So we have to continue to fight bigotry, especially when it comes from Jews, especially when it comes from the Jewish hard left or the Jewish hard right, like the Turek Karta. The one thing the hard left and the hard right have in common is the hatred of the nation state of the Jewish people, and often the hatred of Jews or Jewish institutions. So we have a very difficult fight on our hands, but we must not let this argument by ethnic identity prevail. The argument that says, see, we're Jewish, we're so super critical of Israel, we must be right because we're Jews. That's as fallacious an argument as any argument ever offered, and we must combat it in the court of public opinion, but not in the court of law. Let them speak, let us answer. The best response to falsehood is truth, and we have truth on our side. I want to be clear that I'm not criticizing those who offer legitimate criticisms of Israel. Most of the commentators in Haaretz and other critics of Israel offer legitimate criticism of the current Israeli government, past Israeli governments. I'm talking about people who find no good whatsoever in Israel, people who try to delegitimate Israel, to demonize Israel, who apply a double or triple standard to Israel. Criticism of Israel, of any democracy, is healthy. But lying, perversely lying, and arguing that nothing Israel does is good and everything is badly motivated is beyond the pale of acceptable criticism and must be responded to strongly and with truth and with hard evidence.
All right, Professor, that's all of the time that we have today. Thank you so much for your time. I also want to thank all of our guests, especially former IDF Major General Doron AlMulk. If you'd like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to iltv.tv or our Facebook page and submit them. Finally, to our viewers in America, have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we'll see you again next week.